So let me introduce to you, first of all, Canon Barbie Bach from the Diocese of New Jersey, who serves as on the anti-racism and reparations leader for the and creation, care, and environmental racism work. Canon Barbie is a lay leader in the Episcopal Diocese of New Jersey. And Reverend Chanta Bhan, who is Associate Rector at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church in Austin, Texas. And I would just say that you would be interested to know that Reverend Chanta is the only active woman priest of Pakistani descent in the Episcopal Church and the Anglican Communion. What a burden to bear. To be the only anything is a burden to bear. So I know how that can be. She's a resident in the Diocese of Massachusetts, and Reverend Joseph Cundiff, who is priest in the Diocese of Long Island, and is an American Korean and a priest. And Alan Murray, who's from the Diocese of Oregon and works with the Asian caucus of the deputies of color. I would invite you all to say anything in addition about your own selves that you would love to have people to know about you. Also, you can always Google people and find out more if you really want to know more. So I want to get right with it. So why don't we start with you, Reverend Joseph, and then I'll just call on you because you may not be able to see the order you're in from where you are. So welcome to the screen.
Well, thank you, Dr. Meeks. It's a joy and a real privilege, an honor to be here yet again, to be able to speak with some of my great colleagues and to share a few thoughts with you all. And I hope my thoughts aren't too broad but there's not too many questions. But I think it'll hopefully open the conversation to a lot that Alan and Barbie and Chanta have to say. I think it'll hopefully touch upon a lot of that. But I just wanted to talk about belonging a little bit for Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, specifically within our Episcopal Church. Wondering these days, what is belonging for AAPI, as we might say in the Episcopal Church, and if we've achieved it, or how do we achieve that? Of course, we have platforms and we have spaces like this that you're so graciously and generously able to offer us, Dr. Meeks. And yet at the same time, there was no AAPI month celebrations on the Episcopal Church's official social media platforms this year. So it seems to me as if we don't have a space that's fully conducive for our belonging. Of course, this isn't exclusive to Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the Episcopal Church. And having a social media campaign for Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month wouldn't, of course, solve the problem, but it's just merely one perhaps sign that the space isn't fully conducive to our belonging here. And personally, in my faith journey, through other denominations, I came to the Episcopal Church in large part because of the sense of belonging I found at a particular parish. But in the wider church, we see that many of us as Asian Americans or Pacific Islanders struggle with symptoms of culture shock in our church, symptoms of a sense of homesickness or even depression from being alone in congregations, or worse, alone in the parish at large. Humans, of course, have always sought belonging, and historians note that mixed populations and relative ease of mobility supported this sense of seeking belonging in the Roman Empire. Non-citizens found belonging not to the state, that is the political structure, but they found belonging in associations, like religious association, for those who did not or would not participate in the public worship of that political state. Ours is a faith where we believe all are not only welcomed, as our signs often say that hang outside of our churches, but ours is a faith where all belong. All are supposed to be there.
Mhm.
In a society where AAPI are often seen as the forever foreigner, aren't we supposed to be able to belong fully with God's people in the community of saints, with others like us in faith? Aren't we supposed to be at home in the church, in the body of Christ? Our understanding of AAPI belonging, I believe, is shifting, or even has shifted a lot, and it must continue to shift as we are at a bit of a turning point. Bishops themselves are shifting those figureheads of our church, not only in representation, but also in their allocation of their resources and their missions. There are now specific missioners who are called to do the work specifically with congregations of color and mixed congregations. In the Ethnic Ministries Office, of course, in 815, or at the Episcopal Church's headquarters, we're pivoting away from the first generation immigrant missioner who occupied that office for Asian American ministries for more than a decade. But are we actually turning? Are we actually pivoting? If we look at places like Florida, where AAPI history has been codified by Governor DeSantis, but critical race theory has been banned. Anti-Asian hate is still rampant. Orientalism and fetishization of Asian identities and culture is widespread. Beyond the model minority myth, the understanding often pits non-white identities against the baseline or norm or priority that is a white identity, perhaps a false dichotomy or false framework of thinking. Now is a time in this pivot, perhaps for an opportunity for the Episcopal Church to be that thermostat that transformed the mores of society, not the thermometer, as Dr. King better put it. Not merely to wait until we see what others are doing and say, oh, that's cool, or that's working, or we can copy that for our success, but to be transformed in the Spirit and to take those courageous steps as a leader, knowing that this is part of the work God has given us to do, to make God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So how do we understand AAPI belonging in the Episcopal Church specifically, especially when we're in a society where race is often a zero-sum game and a political, economic one at that? How do we find a real place of belonging in the Episcopal Church without tokenizing, without checking boxes, without the performances of culture? How do we get past a forever foreignness? Do we need specific things like AAPI exclusive churches or heritage specific worshiping spaces to fit our mode of American Anglican theology and worship? No, I believe not, perhaps, and it's maybe even impossible and a futile task. But we need a church whose own identity and self-awareness is one that sees beyond that 1 hour a week, that Sunday morning, not as all of who we are, but we see it as a celebration of all that we are and a bit of an inspiring lament of all we are not yet. We need to be a church that is about being the living body of the Christ, filled with the Holy Spirit, not just for 1 hour, but for all 168 hours in a week. Of course, Sunday morning is not a place to shoehorn or to wedge in everything that we think we need, but it's a place where we can say, my heart is so happy to be with you here to praise and worship our Maker. And we are not yet with so many others of God's beloved. We have work to do with God to realize that kingdom goal of liberation for all of God's beloved children. So what are we doing to transform ourselves to be a people, to be a place where God's kingdom is realized, with all that it takes, with all the loss that will come, because of all of how we know ourselves to be right now is at stake. And yet we know God can do infinitely more than we can ask or imagine. We have to continue to dismantle racism as a tool of politics and economics that is shifting away from the understandings of race and ethnicity by crossing off items on a to-do list. And we have to build a real theology of belonging for AAPI in an Anglo church. We need our spaces, and we need to shift at the thinking from the binary and zero-sum understandings of race and ethnicity. We all have something to lose, but we all have our lives and our souls to gain.
Thank you. And I want to ask the other speakers to keep your eye on the time a little bit, because I don't want to have to interrupt you. And thank you, Reverend Joseph, you did just fine. But I was about to want to interrupt you and you stopped. So that's good. So Reverend Chanta, your topic has to do with being invisible and visible. And I think it really does fit in a good way with some of the things Reverend Joseph just said. So perhaps you could share, and then we'll move along to the others.
Sure. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I've got to say, I was planning to read your entire book, The Night is Long, but Light Comes in the Morning. And then I realized it was so rich. I had to read it in bits and pieces as it was meant to be read as meditation. So I just wanted to thank you for what you've written and what you've contributed, because it's really spoken to me. And I've only had one other experience with the book, The Scapegoat Complex, where I felt that I could only read small nuggets of it at a time to completely digest it. But so much of it has been very healing. And I love the fact that you wrote about the fact that we do some inner work. There's inner work that needs to be done, and that we look for healing. We look for spaces to heal. We ask God for healing. That really the baptismal covenant is about the ways in which God is healing us within the wider community, the wider beloved community. When I think about visibility and invisibility, and I'll make this brief, I tend to like more of the Q&A piece personally. I was also looking at Grace Ji-sun Kim's book, Invisible, which talks about the theology and experience of Asian American women. It's a fairly new book as well. And it talks a little bit about the ways in which we can be invisible and we can also be hyper visible. So we're invisible in the greater scheme of things. We don't tend to make waves. But when we do make waves, then suddenly we're hyper visible for mistakes that we make, usually for issues that are considered to be a little bit more negative, for the things that we say that cause people to think twice, or the things that we do that cause people to sit up and take notice. And so there's a way in which there's an invisibility and a hypervisibility at the same time. And as someone who is not usually represented in spaces, I spent most of my time in white dominant churches. I traveled to Pakistan, especially before the pandemic. I was going once a year and visiting churches there and family there. And there was a way in which there were parts of culture that were really affirmed when I was there. And then I also felt a difference. It was almost like I was 3/4 of the way there and included in the community. And here in the United States, I felt like I was 3/4 included there as well, but not completely included in any community because of the intersectionality of culture. And so, I just share that as someone who's underrepresented in the church, I've sort of come to an awareness in therapy and spiritual direction and in other spaces that sometimes God calls us to be part of communities that are represented, and sometimes God calls us to be part of that community that will advocate for other people, and that they are different callings, and sometimes they are callings that come together. And so looking for spaces that are affirming, certainly the resources here at the Center for Racial Healing and the work that Dr. Meeks has done has been very affirming. I feel as if a lot of the work that she does really has spoken to me and my experience in many ways, and that it may be that God is calling those of us who are underrepresented to be present to other people in a special way. One of the things that I find that I've been looking for, and that I found resources in people who are not just allies, but advocates. So people who have come alongside me. Sometimes they are white men in positions of power who are very aware of their own privilege and come alongside me and help me out. And that's been, I have learned to embrace people in positions of power and authority who are willing to share power with me, because that is what I need. And my hope is that someday I'll be in a position to be able to do that for someone else as well. The issue of implicit bias is another one that I think Dr. Meeks and I had talked about interpersonally last year or last summer. That's been really important to me as well, because I feel as if becoming more aware of my own biases as a person who's not represented, trying to recognize that there are other people who feel similarly. And maybe I've never taken the time to listen to what their experience is or learn from their experience can actually help take the blinders off of me and help me to be more aware of other people's experiences, to be able to come alongside them, to be able to be an advocate, to be able to be an ally, and to be able to be more aware in spaces where others do not feel visible or are feeling extremely invisible or hyper visible. Those are some of the issues that have been important to me, and just recognizing the space in this world that I occupy. But I would also say that Grace Ji-Sun Kim's book Invisible talks about the ways in which sometimes we as Asian women do not want to take up space, sometimes do not want to be visible. And sometimes we're encouraged not to be visible and to remain invisible. And I would say that that's definitely something I'm wrestling with. What does it mean to take up space? What does it mean to allow myself to be visible? And how can I make that visibility more positive? Because it's more likely to be perceived in negative ways and lifted up in negative ways. I'm trying to figure out how I can be aware of that in my own life so that I can be aware of that for other people as well.
Great, thank you so much. And Canon Barbie.
Thank you, Dr. Meeks. It really is a privilege to be here. And I thank everybody who has tuned in to spend some of their evening here. It is AAPI Heritage Month, and I feel like I haven't marked it. And so here we are, the last day of the month, and maybe maybe you didn't even know it was AAPI Heritage Month. So we were asked to choose a topic, and I wanted to speak on mainstreaming the AAPI experience in American society and church life in the context of overcoming internalized racial oppression. And so that title's pretty messed up, but I hope my thoughts are a little bit coherent, and I know that the other speakers on this panel will pick me up on the coherency of this. So, the joy of Pentecost and all the manifestations of the Holy Spirit poured upon the faithful stay with me since Sunday. I hope you feel the same. This year, my parish is in transition. We have an interim priest during the search, and our diocese is also in transition. So our parish invited our bishop-elect to preach and baptize on Pentecost Sunday. She preached well. But I also remember that during COVID, Zoom church, a couple years ago, my church read the Pentecost reading from Acts by 19 people, reading a couple verses in sequence in 19 languages, which included Sri Lanka, Sinhala, Tagalog, Mandarin, and I read it in Japanese. It was a great cacophony. But I think what was missed by every person who experienced that service and at other times is that we remain in a white Anglo-centric institution that congratulates ourselves for diversity, but does not respect and accept the gifts of knowledge and leadership skills among our diversity. The whole point of the speaking of tongues passage should point to that. Universal comprehension, unity, and brotherhood. In my diocese, I've been organizing against racism for more than 2 decades. I was appointed to the Diocesan Racism Committee by the bishop, who was accused of extreme racism by Black clergy and others. At my appointment, as a token Asian and distractor to cause diversion, the bishop said, "I want them to know it's not just black and white." Yes, we know racism is not just black and white, and Alan will talk about that, I'm sure. In these more than 25 years, I've learned much about the legislated structural composition of this country that created racism and race in order to other non-European people to be sure to benefit the white race. People argue against that all the time with me, but let me continue. It's crazy that the United States considers itself a melting pot and the mother of exiles. This is from the Statue of Liberty poem, but has legislated and maintained immigration policies since the 1700s to favor European phenotype and to oppress other groups. But look at the populations and landmass areas of all the continents and lands by ethnicity. Asia is number 1, Africa is number 2, Latin and South America combined to be number 3, and indigenous lands overtaken by colonization surpass European population and land area. Peoples of European origin are the smallest fraction of the world of the so-called races recognized in this society. Yet, this country has internalized Eurocentric white as right and American. So just to focus on Asian American Pacific Islander experience in this country, how do we escape the forever foreigner, the strangers from a different shore? That's the title of Ronald Tataki's book, subtitled A History of Asian Americans. The most exotic stereotypes that limit our potential. When will the othering of everyone who is not white end? And also, when will unjustly racial profiling and scapegoating people of color for crime rates, disease, and economic situations end? Well, I firmly believe that education is key to achieving that change. School-age children are required by law to receive indoctrination by education. For its entire history, this country has taught history lessons by the colonizer and conqueror. And currently, educators are being censored from teaching any truths that make white kids uncomfortable. Well, developing and instructing school curricula should be handed over to Sesame Street. Although still operating in white institutions and its own white institution, Sesame Street would represent a multicultural and multicolored US history. In my state, a big step was made by the New Jersey legislature this year to require public schools to include AAPI history lessons in curricula beginning in the next school year. That is a big step, but a problem with that is that this well-intentioned law still highlights exceptionalism, which is a manifestation of internalized racial oppression. It should be the norm, not the exception, that schools teach this country's full history of all races. The Civil Liberties Act of 1988 provided token financial redress or reparations to 88,000 Japanese Americans still living in 1989 who were unlawfully wronged by the government. The Civil Liberties Act also included a large figure of money to ensure the public was educated about the incarceration of 123,000 persons of Japanese ancestry during World War II. But President Bill Clinton reduced that fund to just $5 million, and the requirement to teach that history just fizzled. Many people still have not learned about Executive Order 9066, but that's not the only incident about Japanese and Asian American history. Teach about the Chinese, Philippine, Japanese, Malaysian, Pakistani, Indian, Thai, Nepalese laborers who worked on the US railroad, highways, mines, fruit and vegetable farms. Teach about the massacre of Chinese immigrants in Los Angeles in 1871. Teach about the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. Have you learned this in history? Teach about the anti-Japanese immigration law in 1924, the murder of Vincent Chin in 1982, and the Reverend Hisanori Kano, who was proposed added to the Episcopal Church calendar. He was my parents' and my grandparents' priest. About Asian American political leaders, about contributors to science and medicine, space travel, sports, and more. But I'm using my experience about the decades-long campaign for reparations for Japanese Americans to advocate for reparations for slavery and reparations for government crimes against Indigenous Americans. I'm advocating for truth-telling and comprehensive history lessons about all non-white peoples. Reforming education can be a tool to loosen the grip of white supremacy and white-centered internalized oppression of people of color. General Convention deputies of color are gaining strength as a powerful voice concerning the polity of the Episcopal Church. A member of the Asian Caucus reminds us that although AAPI people have been receiving media coverage as victims of racial bias crimes, we are not solely victims, and we do have joy to celebrate, and Pentecost joy. So thank you very much.
Our brother Alan.
Thank you, Dr. Meeks, for this invitation. It's a really tough act to follow after listening to all the panelists' inspiration. My name is Alan Murray. I'm from the Diocese of Oregon. I'm also the first generation immigrant. I came to the United States in 1999 for graduate school. In fact, I'm the only person in my family that immigrated to this country. My parents, my sister, my nephews are all still in Singapore. So growing up in Singapore, I was always a dominant race and not a minority until I came to this country. So it was quite a paradigm shift for me, and which is what was laying very heavy on my heart is the issue on that I want to talk about this evening is on microaggression and also on intersectionality. And I'm already hearing a lot of intersectionality from the other three panelists who, spoke on so many different areas of our history and heritage. And so I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about microaggression. The Episcopal Church has been doing and engaging a lot of racial justice and racial healing work for over the last couple of decades. More so, I think, in the last decade, a lot of these works has been accelerating, but yet we still have a lot of white supremacy culture to dismantle within our structure and our system. And that's the reason what drove me to being so passionate about my ministry, which is primary church governance. I've been involved at General Convention since 2012. This next year will be my 5th General Convention. And why did I like this work is because if you want to dismantle white supremacy and systemic and institutional racism, we have to start from our church structure and our polity and our governance. So one of the things that we have done a lot in the last couple of decades is requiring anti-racism training. I actually really kind of hate that term, anti-racism training, because it seems like it is a one-time thing, check off the mark, and you are done, and that's it. I met my canonical requirement. I want to challenge all of us to the vision of becoming the beloved community, which is that we need to allow the work of anti-racism to be a formation, a personal development, a community growth opportunity, and not as a one-time check off the list, because that is exactly what is being really transactional, which doesn't bring about transformation. So we've done a lot of work on anti-racism, but our church still has not done much work on addressing microaggression. So what are some of those microaggression? So some expert has defined microaggression as everyday verbal, nonverbal, environmental slights, snaps, or insults, whether it's intentional or unintentional, which communicate hostile, derogative, and negative messages to target person based solely upon their marginalized group membership. So I think my personal experience within the Episcopal Church is usually not so intentional, a lot of unintentional microaggression. It can be racist, it can be sexist, it can be homophobic, or any combination of these. So remember, I'm going to talk about the intersectionality, and so we have to really start looking at how we as a church, if we want to become the beloved community, to address microaggression. So, for those who are identified as white, reflect on the last time you saw a racial microaggression happen. And, have you have a conversation with that individual? And for every one of us, consider what microaggressions have you experienced related to your identity, and how did you feel, and how do you wish to be perceived instead? So the first thing I encourage people to do is do not reach out to a non-white person to give you examples of microaggressions, because I think that first of all, it is very traumatizing for a lot of people of color who experience that, both in a macro level, but also on a micro level. There are a lot of resources out there that can really guide you in learning, going deeper into how to we address microaggressions. Even though the word says micro, but it is actually pretty macro. A lot of psychologists has really referred to the impact of microaggression as a death by 1,000 paper cuts for those who experience them on a regular basis. This is from one of the article that was in New York Times. And it may be defined more overt forms of racism, but microaggression are more accurately subvert acts, a way to undermine or corrupt someone. So, which makes them all more sinister, especially when people use them intentionally to get away with racism in public settings. So, what are some of those impact besides the mental, emotional toll that it takes on people? There's a lot of research that have shown that on Black teenagers in the United States that face microaggression multiple times a day, most frequently actually online, leads to a very high rate of depression. So when we talk about what the non-whites can do in your allyship and in your work in dismantle racism, is that you do have white privilege, and with that privilege does comes with the responsibility to intervene on behalf of someone who has been harmed, and to address the racist interaction directly. So one of the psychologists, Daryl Wing Su, who is in Columbia University, offered this way of addressing, has a lot of resources. So one example is that we who have experienced microaggression can also call that out. We are not powerless, and we need to be empowered to be able to name that. So you can say something like, "I know you didn't realize this, but when you say where did I come from, it was hurtful and offensive because you are assuming that people who are born here are better than those who are immigrant. Instead, you could say that my heritage is of Irish descent. What is your cultural or ethnic heritage?" So those are some ways that you can name it, and to be really direct, and to offer really a different perspective. Um, so the other thing that I want to really kind of talk about is the term intersectionality. I know that this has become a buzzword in recent history. At least since 2014, that term has been used quite a lot. Um, there is actually how this word came about from a legal scholar. This word was actually coined in 1989, defining in which multiple forms of inequality or oppression, such as racism, sexism, classism, ableism, heterosexism, can compound and create different modes of discrimination or disadvantage. So we cannot, we cannot talk about racism without talking about all other ism. That is really, really crucial. My work on this journey of racial justice actually started with being invited to sit on the Executive Council and the Committee on the Status of Women. And I was looking at the president of the House of Deputies at that time and said, are you crazy? I'm the only guy on this group of 12 women. What do I have to say about their oppression? And I was completely wrong. It was transformational for me because of I learned about the oppression of women, that led me to actually start looking at the intersectionality and the oppression of all other marginalized groups. And so the deputies of color has been really hard at work. We have over 200 deputies of color, which is really remarkable in the recent history. In the last General Convention, which is so truncated because of COVID, we had passed 36 resolutions related to racial justice. Within the Asian and Pacific Islander Caucus, we have endorsed about 17 resolutions. And out of the 17, I think we passed about 15 of them. And a lot of these resolutions are really intersection with other issues, not just on race. We supported, the investigation of indigenous boarding school. We have also lifted up our trans gender siblings by affirming gender affirming care at the last General Convention. So we've done a lot of intersection type of work. So I would really like to, in summary, just to encourage all of us to find ways of developing tools to address microaggression in our congregation, in our church structure. And the other thing is that as we engage in this racial justice work, we need to also liberate other oppressed groups, because our liberation is tied to another person's liberation. And I think Dr. Martin Luther King knows that very well about intersectionality, even he did not use that word. So thank you.
Thank you all so much for all of those words, and for you, particularly for your just being so clear about the kinship that we have in terms of doing this work. And in terms of the struggle, I think one of the biggest mistakes we make is when we start trying to parcel out whose struggle is worse than who's somebody else's, instead of realizing we're all in it together, and there is a system of supremacy that is not picking and choosing. It is after anything that it doesn't fit. And so I would like to now invite the audience to engage with you with comments, questions, briefly. Please be brief and concise, let me put it that way. But to just have a bit of a conversation here regarding the comments you've heard or thoughts that have been evoked for you as you've been listening and thinking. If you'll just, I think the best way to do this, if you'll just unmute yourself and let me know you're trying to speak, I can see you. I think that'll work. Not everybody at once. Yes, Marie, unmute yourself.
Okay, you're on top of it. It's only like 5 o'clock here, almost. I would like to say I am horrified by the fact that education has gone the direction it has gone in. I was astounded a couple of years ago just walking through a bookstore, seeing that this, and this. But I mean, these were books, some of them Pulitzer Prize winners. And how is this going to help us move forward and not backwards? You know, I'd like to help. I mean, be of some help in that, arena, because I grew up with a father who read, religiously, and it's important. Education is, you're working with a formative mind, and for anyone to be left out or feel left out or not understood, it breaks my heart.
Thank you. And panel members, feel free to jump back in the conversation yourselves. And if there's something else you want to add or want to say something to each other, let's just try to make this a conversation here between all of us that are on the screen.
Yeah, I just want to say something real quick, and thank you for that about education. A couple of weeks ago, I was attending a workshop in a synagogue on the intersection of anti-Semitism and white nationalism. And based on the statistics that they have collected and based on the outcome, they have concluded that one of the best tools against reducing anti-Semitism and hate crimes towards the Jews was to teach Holocaust history. It seems very simple, but that was what they have found out that had to be really effective. And as we know, there is a movement right now in this country that is systemically trying to erase history. So that is really very concerning. So I would encourage all of us to be a great advocate. Write to your representative, write to your senator, even if they might be holding the same views. I just had this conversation a few days ago with my friends. They were saying that, oh, well, I just don't understand why we can't do anything about gun violence in this country. Over 60% of the population support of gun regulations, banning assault rifle, and 90% support comprehensive background check. I say that, yes, that might be the statistics, but what are the 60% of those people doing? And what are the 90% of those people doing? It's one thing to show up in the poll that you support these issues, but it's the other thing to engage your legislature to let them know that you want change. So do that. Please write to your senators, to your representative, no matter which side of the aisles they are in.
And I think you all have highlighted some of the major issues here. We have to quit talking about what we're not willing to do. We have all these fancy new materials and new studies. I mean, I've just been on a little bit of a tear about our church being so. We're gonna do an audit to see if we're racist, and I've just fall out laughing. Like, really? Well, I could have saved you all of that time and money. And we have mandated that people take training, take classes on dismantling racism, and we still have more than 60% of the diocese that are doing nothing, absolutely nothing about doing that. So and resolutions don't do any good if they don't have any teeth in them. We love to pass resolutions. Some of them help, but some of them don't, because it gets right down to people, what you just said, Brother Alan, people have to act. We do have to act. And so I think it's really, I hope that this kind of conversation, this kind of gathering will encourage people to be a little bit more inspired to act, to not just do one more book study, but if you do a book study, let it lead to something. Let it lead to a pilgrimage, let it lead to an action, let it lead to walking across the street to get to know somebody that doesn't look like you. I mean, we've got to shift some of the energy into we're smart, we're Episcopalians after all. So we know how to think, we know how to write, we know how to do analysis. We're really good at all that. And when we get done with it, we think we've really done something. But actually, all we did was wear ourselves out, and nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. We're just tired, you know. So I think that it's that we have to. I'm just on this kind of evangelistic thing about let's not be talking about it if we don't intend to do it. You know, let's just quit the conversation until we get ready to do something about it. So, and when it comes to Asian American Pacific Islanders, we've got so many stereotypes that, and so many little ways of being very denigrating and dehumanizing, and yet we kind of act like we got it together around. I mean, I was really struck, Reverend Joseph, about the comment, your observation that there was nothing on the National Church website or anything about it being Asian Pacific, Asian American Pacific Islander month. I mean, we've been at the Center for Racial Healing. We've been talking about this every week. You know, we put things out every week in our newsletter, on our website, and we have a virtual library that is collecting information and trying to help make the point that here's a group of folks that we don't talk about much, because we kind of want to act like you're okay, but you're not okay. I mean, you're not being treated right. So I'm just, you know, all of us here, you all, where are you with this? What are your thoughts? Yes, Hannah.
Thank you. I wanted to say that Canon Barbie really touched me. This past Sunday, my Liberian American rector had me read the reading from Acts in Vietnamese, which is my grandmother and my mother's language. And all the Romans and all the Buddhists in my family in Vietnam and in France and in California, for the first time in their lives, watched an Episcopal service on Facebook. And I was really quite scared because I had my grandmother's King James Bible in Vietnamese, and all those words like Phrygia and all those other places, I had never heard them. Although my grandmother did childcare and spoke no English, so my Vietnamese is pretty good. But I wanted to say that it's my first time in the Episcopal Church that a part of me felt more whole.
That's wonderful.
I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thing is, I've been trying to
And
work
your heritage was included, and that's what the Episcopal Church liturgy does not choose to include anything that is not of the Anglo tradition. But thank you very much for sharing that.
You're welcome.
And I think that's one of the places where we're missing the most. I mean, we have churches with people from other ethnic groups, and yet we do the same stuff Sunday after Sunday instead of being exposed to what they bring to the table, which would enrich us who don't know anything about it, and would also give them a sense of really belonging, Reverend Joseph, rather than being guests in a house where they're being entertained. And I want to know, I don't want to just keep, I'm really tired of the stuff we do. And I'm ready for some re-inspiration and regeneration. And I think that it can come from some of these places that we have walled off and said, oh yeah, come and be with us, but now don't get too comfortable and don't get too carried away here, because you've got a place and we don't want you to get too far out of it. Yes, Brother James.
I'm very pleased to be part of this this session, because what it tells me is that we, no matter what your age is, you have a lot to learn, a lot to grow on. I met Alan last year at the Deputies of Color pre-convention event. And what I learned from it was that we all have our own story, but we all have the same enemy. And that enemy is what we all have to draw our energies to fight. The storytelling is important because we learn and we grow. We share our heritage stories. I knew very little about Asian American trials. I knew very little about indigenous peoples' issues, what they have had to overcome. Here in Florida, we've had boys' homes that are similar in relationship to those bad kids who were marginalized, and they were placed in homes and places where there were atrocities that occurred. So we all have experiences, but we all have that common enemy, and I think that that's where we can take action. I'm appalled that our governor's actions, relationship with books. I'm appalled that the majority of individuals who feel that protecting their children from the truth is okay, because we don't learn to grow as a entire community, and to learn and to sit and to understand whether it's from Africa, from Asia, whether it's from other parts of this country where there are heritages that are rich in love, because we all serve the same God. We all, whether Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist, we all serve God. We just happen to bring Christ in it and love. And so I really thank the speakers for sharing, but also teaching and helping me to grow. I hope that everyone else has had that opportunity to grow as well. I've gone on a little bit too long.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zoe, and then Reverend Karen, and then Althea, and then Roberto. Okay, so.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that that this idea of being able to deal with discomfort and being able to get into a kind of forgiveness, that self-forgiveness and forgiveness of people who made mistakes and errors in the past, for white people in particular, is so important to support each other in doing that in the church, because in order to move past it and to call out white supremacy when it happens, it means being willing to be in this discomfort and breaking down, a lot of things that you thought were truths is from your education, from a lot of life. We've been doing this at Holy Cross Church, where I go in Kingston, which is a bilingual church. And just yesterday for Pentecost, we've had but more bilingual services during the year to really try to be a more balanced church. And we've been saying many of the prayers in Spanish, even in the English service, in order to really learn the language. But I will say that it's more work. And that is what every church is going to have to accept, that to learn about each other's traditions and really take it in, not just occasionally, but try to understand one another more. It takes time and openness and willingness to be uncomfortable about what you don't quite understand, and being able to ask and learn about it. I was very moved when in at the conventions in New York, when the prayers were said in 9 different languages, and it's beautiful, but you really got to focus to be reading, and just to understand it. So I'm just saying it's good work. It's God's work. It's worth everybody doing that work, but it does take more effort.
But if we start making it a part of our lives, it won't be work. It'll just be what we do. And that's what it needs to become. Reverend Karen, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone who's spoken. I have been thinking in an eerie way of this book that I read in high school called 1984, where they were burning books and there was surveillance and that kind of thing. And so it feels like in some ways we are back there again. And I wanted to say I was really sort of heartened or urged by the idea that we need to stop, we need to continue to do some of these things, but we need to act, do action as well. Because I find that many well-meaning folk signing petitions and that kind of thing, but not laying it down is an issue. Because some of that stuff can be really glossy, but it doesn't achieve what I think we're looking for. That we got to get out there. We got to lay ourselves down, because that's what's happening in if we look at, turn on the news. And then one of the other things I would say, just in closing, is that I was in a study group with a group of international women who was reading A Different Mirror by James, I think it's James Takaki. And we did it as a study group, and it's painful because I don't think most of us really know the history, but also know the history of, one, the pain, and two, the contributions of our brothers and sisters that made this country. We made this country. And so kind of gets me excited when I think of that. But we have to remember, read our history and act. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Althea.
Yes, I have been a member of 3 different Episcopal churches in which I was the only AAPI. And in 2 of the churches, there was a significant amount of micro and macroaggression that I experienced. And it wasn't until I joined African American Episcopal Church that I truly felt welcome. In fact, they even made me senior warden. And so I think that there's this real need for us to work together because we can accomplish so much when we work together. And I know that we don't all have the same experience, but I think that all of us, even those people who are white, have had experiences of being in the minority. And if we can remember what it's like to be in a minority, then perhaps we can be more welcoming to those who are in our midst, who are a minority. And I really just want to thank those people who are working together to make everybody welcome in the Episcopal Church.
Thank you. Roberto?
Yes, I want to say thank you to all people who speak, and really very powerful message. And shout out to my old friend Alan in Oregon. To me, I strike a chord what Alan say, asking to sometime a member of a minority group to explain to you something. It's a heavy burden. It's like adding salt to the injured many times. And there are times in my life that I feel like I am back into the valley of the dry bones, in Ezekiel 37, and finding hope. And that's a message in my view of that particular passage. God is asking us to prophesy. And that's what we're called at the end. And it's an intentionality. And you need to keep asking the same question. Do this bone will have life, son of man, paraphrasing. And that's something that to me is a driving force. I need to understand that sooner or later, yes, the bone will come together, the flesh and the muscle. And at the end of the story, ending on all the dry bones, don't be any more dry, become bodies full of life and stood up as an army. It's a metaphor there. Maybe sometimes we see ourselves in that dry bone. I am preaching to a bunch of dry bones. Nobody's moving, nothing's happening. But I need to keep my faith in God, and sooner or later something will happen. And that's my piece of today. Don't lose hope. It's not going to be easy. Ezekiel had to preach 3-4 times the same message, kind of. But finally, the dry bones stop to be just that and become the people of God. We're the people of faith, and I know how difficult that is. Sounds easy, but it's nothing easy.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mary.
Aloha. And thank you very much, Dr. Meeks, for the opportunity. And I would like to extend a heartfelt mahalo to my sisters and brothers from the AAPI caucus for not just facilitating this get together, but for the years of advocacy that has come out of the AAPI caucus, and the intersectionality that has been intentional part. It's the intentionality that speaks to your hearts. And I, as a fellow first generation immigrant to the United States, thank you for the trail that you have blazed, and the awareness that you have brought in conjunction with deputies of color. That this work is lighter when we all put our shoulders together to the yoke. And I am very, very grateful for all the hard work that has been put into it. I am a parishioner at St. Clement's in Honolulu, which is which was founded by 3 people that had separated from the diocese, from the Cathedral of St. Andrews, that was founded by the King Kamehameha and Queen Emma. And the 3 white men that separated from the cathedral in protest founded this highly academic, highly economically privileged parish that I belong. And I, along with my family as well as a Tongan family, are the token visible representatives of color per se in my parish. And I take very seriously my calling to be the troublemaker. I have been blessed by God with the gift of audacity to just speak uncomfortable truths to my friends, especially, and not just people I don't know. I am very, very grateful for this opportunity, and continue to pray and advocate and pray that God continues to strengthen you all and all of us to continue this very, very important work that we all do together. To the sister that spoke about the blessing of being able to speak her mother tongue in church. As a language translator and interpreter, this is one of my passions. For the church to provide language access as a way for equalizing all of us. We are in the process of translating the Book of Common Prayer into Hawaiian right now in our diocese. But my hope and dream is that the materials for evangelism could be translated to all of our indigenous languages, because why do we keep losing our immigrants to these fundamentalist churches, the new hopes that preach separation and our differences, and instead of the good news of the love of Christ that equalizes and includes all of us, as the passion of our presiding bishop continues to say, because there is plenty good room for all of us. And here I am getting kind of carried away again, but again, mahalo. Thank you so much for all the work that you all continue to do and continue to advocate for. And one more point to my brother James that says we have the common enemy. Please look out for our own people who does great harm to our work. My own state here in Hawaii have two polar opposites, women in the political sphere.
So Mary, excuse me, but you need to find a way to put a period at the end of one of those sentences.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for all of the work that you have done. And I pray that we all are strengthened and continue to find disciples in this great work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I want to encourage you to persevere and to keep being a holy disruptor. I think that's the best identity anybody can have, and I support that completely.
Thank you.
I would like to give each panel member an opportunity now to have of just a last word remark as we wrap up our time together, unless there's somebody that's got something to say and you're just going to really be distressed if you don't get to say it. If that's the case, I don't want anybody to leave and be distressed. So who's speaking?
You know, there is some comfort in affinity groups, and we are very comfortable when we're with our peeps, and so we love the Asian Caucus of Deputies of Color. But I want to say you're all our peeps right now, and thank you for being with us tonight.
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you for your work and for your vigilance. I think, you know, if I had to have one big wish that I could get filled, it would be that all of us would really see each other as a part of ourselves. If we did that, then we would think differently, act differently, be more concerned about the welfare of everybody. If we ever truly accept that we are all God's people and we're all connected, it would change the world. I mean, we spout that off, but we don't believe it. And the folks that are connected to me are the ones that I like and that give me something and do stuff for me, not the person living under the bridge or the person living in the penthouse. I'm not connected to them. I'm connected to whoever is like me. So we need to, I think that could be and that's something we can do as individuals. We don't have to wait on the church. We don't have to wait on the state. We don't have to wait on anybody. We can make up our own minds to be that intentional about every soul that we encounter, to see that person as a part of ourselves. And it shifts your way of seeing people and talking to people and thinking about people. And it causes you to reach out and learn and be more open, just to make that internal shift. The other panelists, I want to give you a chance now to say something as we close.
I just want to thank all of you for being here. I think your willingness to show up in this space says a lot about your commitment of wanting to learn more and to grow and to support each other in this difficult work. But I'm always a person of hope and resurrection. So I want to close by offering this quote from Mother Teresa that says that I used to pray that God would feed the hungry or to do this or that. But now I pray that he will guide me to do whatever I'm supposed to do, what I can do. I used to pray for answers, but now I'm praying for strength. I used to believe that prayer changes things, but now I know that prayer changes us and we change things.
I love it. Thank you. Joseph and Chanta.
All right. Chanta, go ahead.
That's okay. I was going to let you go ahead. I would just say that thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Meeks, for letting us be here and for everyone who is a part of this. You know, my hope for myself and for those of us who have been here is that we will come alongside others. And when we see injustice, we'll speak up on behalf of those who are experiencing the injustice, that we'll feel more empowered to do that. I'm working on that myself. And that as we see justice rolling forward in other people's lives and in society, that we'll feel even more empowered because we know that we had a part in all of that. And so, you know, I just encourage everyone who's here, and in it, I'm saying this to myself, to be willing to be courageous, to be willing to be brave, and to be willing to speak up when those moments arise.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joseph.
Yeah, just thanks again to you, Dr. Meeks, for facilitating this and making this happen, to my fellow panelists for spending some time, and for all of everybody else tuning in and to take part in this conversation. And like Chanta, I've learned a lot hearing from all of you and from my fellow panelists again, and really inspired. Dr. Meeks, you sort of summed this up, I think, in the best way to. I feel this movement here, this energy or this spirit of being the change, right? Of not just talking about it, but actually doing it and actually being it every day in our lives and every fiber of our being. So I've learned a lot here that I need to allow myself to be transformed into, to grow into, and to be. And I hope we all can take that out and share that with the world as the good news.
Well, thank you all. Thank you, all of the panelists, but also all of you who came as participants. And Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson said that when she was a first-year student at Harvard, walking down the promenade, scared to death, that this Black woman, an older woman who she thinks probably worked there, walked up to her and said, never had seen her before in her life, and said to her, persevere. So I want to say to you, persevere, and that perseverance as a form of resistance, not just as a form of surviving or getting along, but as a form of resistance to all of the forces that would cause us to denigrate ourselves and denigrate each other, because that is our own work, and it's the work we can be in charge of. And so please, let's all keep praying for each other, that we will stay conscious and courageous and persevere. And thank you so much for being on the journey, and take good care. Good night.